So somebody asked me the other day, what's scarier, giving a talk at AO or running Golden Gate? I've only done one of those things, so I'll let you know in about an hour. So my name is Kailee Hutchison, and I'm an expedition rafter. I'm a recovering whitewater raft guide, and I also run Rafting Magazine's Junior Expedition team. And today we're going to be talking about building confidence and leadership in female guides. And we're going to be talking about the general rather than the specific, because it's going to have differences in different pockets of communities. So learning objectives, we're going to break down these pain points. So we'll be identifying problems that contribute to the lack of female leadership in the outdoors. We'll be identifying the impact of these problems on all of your staff, male and female, and how that impacts that. And then we're going to be exploring action-based solutions and best practices. So essentially, we're going to be breaking down the what is attributing to less confidence and why there is less leadership from women in the outdoors. Confidence leads to leadership. So, how is confidence different for women? I got the chance to do a lot of interviews over the last 6 months, traveling around the United States and talking to women from all aspects of the outdoors. And in these interviews, there have been a lot of recurring themes, which have been really interesting, and they're generally not really talked about. So I wanted to chat with you guys about those. So, how is building confidence different? So, women face more challenges in strength-based sports. Women on average have about 20% less muscle mass than men on average. So there's typically going to be more challenges with that. There's typically less female peers and mentors in adventure sports as well. That includes less female managers, pro athletes, and that's changing in different pockets as well. And women have different values in communication. So on the first one of facing challenges in strength-based sports, a lot of these challenges can start off as physical and then become mental, and you can hold yourself back. With having different values in communication, women generally will come to solutions differently as well. Women are not small men. In a different, right? So in addition to physical differences, we also learn differently. Sometimes it's because of those differences that we have to learn things differently. How did you ask? Great question. So one thing that keeps coming up is going to be emotional intelligence. And so I want to define that now. That's something we're going to be talking about over and over again today. So emotional intelligence is recognizing and working through emotional reactions through perspective, skill, and technique. So we see that a lot of times when we're doing a new river for the first time, or we're stepping it up. You see there's a gnarly rapid that you want to run. What do those emotional reactions look like? If you're teaching at guide school, you'll see that as well. How are we working through that? So we talked about the what, but let's talk about the why. Why is confidence not being built in women? And we're going to go through a few different things. A lot of these problems are going to be cyclical rather than linear. So a lot of these, it's not just, A to B to C to D. And so it's going to take time to make these changes. So we're going to talk about the 5 problems of why confidence is not being built in women. And then we're going to describe them in more detail. And again, I just want to preface, this is going to be solution-based. We're not just going to stop at the problems, but I want to give you guys some tools to put in your tool belt for when you go home. So number 1, the good enough mentality, not focusing on sharpening skills. Number 2, no clear steps or standards of advancement. Number 3, less representation at the top. Number 4, women are being left behind in mentorship. And number 5 is gender segregation. Number 1 is going to be the good enough mentality. So I think we're all familiar with that. Yeah, it's that's good enough. You know, you need bodies to take more bodies down the river, right? Can they get guests down relatively safely? Great, you're hired. Can you work tomorrow? So the good enough mentality, you know, muscle through and it's good enough. And this is going to be indicative of how we train people as well. It's the idea that if you muscle through, you'll be fine. So if you're relying on muscle, it's going to be a lot of strength and ego-based training exercises. And if you're relying on muscle, that can contribute to injury as well. And it can marginalize women by treating them like small men. Women are not just small men. And I know I'm super swole and hell strong, you know, clearly. But I'd like to invite Nathan up as well. So Nathan is one of my team paddlers. I paddle with him all the time. So Nathan and I, we're pretty similar in stature, right? But there's going to be a lot of differences as far as how we get down the river and our different ways of how we're going to have that technique to read water and know what we're capable of. So, I mean, our biceps are pretty similar, but like Nathan doesn't have any problem lifting me up. But if I want to lift him up, it's going to be a lot harder for me, right? I can still lift him, but it's going to be a lot harder. Thank you, Nathan. So you can kind of think of that as far as having a boatload of people, right? So if you have somebody who's 6'2", versus me, who wants to take a boatload of 8 people, or between Nathan and myself, I'm going to have to figure out a different way to utilize my resources and my paddle strokes and learning how to read water differently so that I'm not going to be injuring myself. Because Nathan can muscle through a heck of a lot more stuff than I can. So, in more ways than just physical, women are not just small men. So, a lot of this training, the training again, is going to be sink or swim training. You know, just send it, go for it, push through. You guys can make it through the rapid. But unfortunately, that sets the stage for injury. And not just for females, that's for everybody across the board, right? I think just females tend to perhaps get injured a little bit more quickly. And finally, as far as communication goes, a lot of the training disregards emotional intelligence. So problem number 2, we're going to be talking about no clear standards for advancement and how that contributes to the lack of confidence in female guides. Side note, I was doing a little product shot for La Sportiva, and you know, with rafting, usually your shoes are underneath the thwart, so thought of a creative solution to show off the shoes. That one really hurt. All right, so no clear standards for advancement. So, what is the difference between a female raft guide and a Yeti? I'm sure you guys have heard this one. One's stinky and hairy, and the other one's a mythical creature. So this joke is indicative of a lot of the low standards that we have. So expectations so low that we don't even expect guides to have proper hygiene. These low standards also extend to knowledge of basic skills or even professional conduct. How do we speak to each other and to our coworkers? Number 2, predatory behavior and hookup culture. How does this affect building confidence in the workplace? Well, that just sexualizes the workplace. Number 3 is going to be favoritism and retaliation. So that can divide the workplace through social cliques. I'm sure you guys have experienced this. If you're not on the ins, you can be on the outs. So, you know, knowing the head guides. If you're in, head guides will cherry pick their crew and their friend's crew. So you have the power really centralized, and they're able to, you know, cherry pick the stronger crews, the people who are more likely to tip. Whereas if you're on the outside, you might face more retaliatory behavior. And you might be given harder crews, people who are less likely to tip. And you might be given crews that will, are more likely to end up with more carnage. And with more carnage, we have beer fines. So, let's talk about beer fines. So beer fines do not build confidence because it shames failure. It inhibits the learning cycle through negative reinforcement. It changes the learning cycle into a vicious cycle. And it's docking pay for minor mistakes, which is illegal throughout the United States. So if you're enforcing beer fines or if you're just complicit with it happening within that company, it's really tantamount to docking pay. And finally, you'll lose guys who don't conform to peer pressure. So in a strength-based system, who do you think is the one paying out for more beer? It's going to be the physically weaker staff, which is straight up discrimination. So that's not going to build confidence in our guides, and that's not going to keep our women guides, or a lot of our guides, within our companies. So the next topic we're going to talk about is less representation of women at the top. So women are not becoming leaders because they don't feel supported in gaining basic skills. A lot of women are leaving the sport. Women are less likely to be found as owners, trip leaders, managers, or even professional athletes. And now that's totally changing. It's amazing to be at this conference and see how different it is compared to other shows I've been to. I've been in the industry for a long time. It's just phenomenal to see so many women here. So are we giving our women the tools that they need to achieve success? What does that look like? Are you highlighting women within your company? And what does that look like? I'd like to share some thoughts from a friend, Cheyenne. She's a freestyle cliff diver and a Red Bull photographer. Cheyenne gives an example as to why representation is important and how men and women coach differently.
And it was really exciting to see other women doing these sports, and that when I saw Chelsea doing stuff, I was like, okay, I can for sure do this. I can absolutely do this. Like, Chelsea's so cool, she's so encouraging and so motivating. And that's when I realized that it's fine for me to try these things. Turns out the guys are super supportive. The freestyle community is amazing. They were so excited to see me throwing down and learning new tricks and learning flips and so willing to teach me. But as far as getting that first push to try it myself, it was really helpful to have another girl there with me.
So we're really talking about like building confidence. And so she talks about having another girl present, having peers, having mentors, having somebody available. And again, we're going to be talking about those solutions as well. But the problem right now is we just don't have enough female mentors. What that brings to our teams is the lack of female perspective and technique. We talk about breaking down rapids rather than just pushing through, and having a different perspective of how to make something happen. There's a lack of emotional intelligence in training. We have an ego-driven environment, and that leads to gender segregation in sports as well. So let's break down those a little bit further. Women are being left behind in mentorship. What does that mean? They're not being supported in basic skills. And so you don't need to have a female mentor, but having a female mentor and having some representation definitely helps. It's really about being mentored effectively. And again, we bring, it's going to be the difference between strength versus technique. We talked about being more prone to injury by relying on that strength. And again, that's for men and women. And not using emotional intelligence to work through those challenges. Are you having people that are having trouble going to the next tier in class 3 to class 4, or going through those differences from a guide to a trip leader? How are we addressing those concerns? If you have somebody who's looking at a long multi-move rapid, Are we working through if emotion that they have? Are they anxious? Are they upset? Are we working through that emotion with them and giving them that perspective, that skill and that technique? Hey, you've done this before. You've done this and this. I know you have this skill. I've seen you do this. Let's talk about techniques to get through this rapid. Are we breaking down that rapid into manageable bites? Hey, look, there's eddies here, here, and here. Why don't you, if you make this move here, you can eddy out, recircle, and then do the next part. Or are we just telling people to paddle really hard? Because sometimes we just can't paddle really hard or paddle hard enough to make that move. So what options are we giving people? And finally, problem number 5 is going to be gender segregation in adventure sports. So if we have inefficient training in our general training, women will go somewhere else to find it. So why is there gender segregation? It's been a reaction to, women's only training has been a reaction to a boys club with little accountability. Again, this is not everywhere, this is just a reaction to when that does happen. It's designed to be a place to actually learn skills rather than just muscle. They've been designed to help women feel safe from sexual harassment, and they are probably the only place you can guarantee that you'll have a female mentor. Now, short-term clinics are fantastic. They're a great way to build skill and camaraderie and swap techniques with other female guides. And so you can have different ones of how to get into the boat and how to flip a raft back over. Because if you're 120 pounds soaking wet and you have a oar frame raft or a 14.5 footer with people in it, how heavy is that going to be to maneuver? Or if you do flip, to get back on it and flip it back over. So there's a problem though with long-term gender segregation. And it creates the us versus them mentality, which can otherize the opposite gender. It can create a soft bigotry of low expectation, which is really just the ignorance of the other person's skill. And finally, it creates an unhealthy work culture in both male and female-dominated workplaces. So the ignorance of skill can create misguided encouragement, and it can also create disingenuous support cycles. So I'm not a goddess, I'm not a queen, I'm an individual, like Cheyenne said. I'm an individual, and I want to be respected for my individual ability. It can also lead to the show-up trophy. So the show-up trophy just talks about, hey, you're a girl and you're here, that's awesome. And while I understand that that comes from the stoke of having that representation, it really doesn't account for the hard work it took to get there. And again, it creates unhealthy work culture by creating unbalanced personal relationships based on bravado and competitiveness if you have just a male or female dominated workplaces. So we talked about a lot of the problems, but I want to talk about solutions. But we have to identify the problems before we can get here and know what we need to address. So how do we address the issues facing women in the outdoors? Well, the question is, how do we build confidence? So I mentioned we had reoccurring themes from women all over the outdoor industry. And I wanted to share some of Cheyenne's thoughts of how to build confidence.
When I was scared about doing something, I thought it was a pretty big jump, and I was like, you had to jump out to clear a gap. And I was genuinely concerned that I didn't have the leg strength to clear this gap. Because honestly, another girl had tried it before that I didn't know, and it didn't go well for her. And so I was thinking, maybe because I am a girl, maybe I'm not as strong to clear this gap. And I kind of said that, and I had one of my guy friends say, are you kidding me? Like, are you serious right now? Like, yeah, you're a girl, but you're a hell of a lot stronger than a lot of my guy friends, and they've done this, and I know for a fact that you would be okay. And so I was like, you know what, why was I thinking that? Why was I even thinking of that as a concern? Sure enough, not only did I clear the gap, I went so far past the gap, it was not even a problem. But it was important for me to realize, don't ever underestimate yourself, and especially don't underestimate yourself because of your gender. We may be physically weaker in some aspects, but we are a hell of a lot stronger in other aspects, and you need to keep that in mind. You are an individual competing and working with other individuals. It's an individual level. And this is all about you and what you believe you can do.
So, how do we build confidence? Coming from that individual level and not putting people in a box and not putting yourself in a box. Because again, a lot of these issues can start off as feeling like you're weaker, but if you don't work on those skills, it can become more mental, and then you're actually holding yourself back. So we're going to break down 3 things that build confidence, and we're going to talk about those a little bit more. So improving your training plan, promoting gender integration, and finally prioritizing emotional intelligence. Improving your training plan. So how do we do that? You want to define those clear standards. Have more time for training, and have open opportunities for advancement. So defining clear standards. Define your company culture. We're promoting safe companies rather than safe spaces. Safe spaces can imply that you have a hostile work environment. You want to secure your company. So it's not about putting women into a different safe space. It's about securing your company and your company being a safe place. You're reliable for those who you continue to employ. I have a junior team, and it's a bunch of young girls. So we have a junior team. It wasn't necessarily meant to be a women's team, but it just kind of organically happened that way. So I have 13, 14, and a 16-year-old girls, and they just come rafting and they do all this stuff, and it's been amazing. And our junior women's team is not a safe place for young girls because all of our operations rely on safe practices regardless of class of person. We're seeking a culture shift from islands of safety into continents of safety. And in doing that, documenting cases of harassment before termination, if that were to be the case in your companies. If there's no documentation, what is keeping that employee from continuing that behavior? Open opportunities for advancement. So creating advancement plans for your guides. Encourage certifications. IRF is the International Rafting Federation. Swiftwater Rescue, WOOFR. Define the ability to move through your system in clear incremental ways. So you can have a sheet of paper outlining the skills somebody needs to move up in your company. River logs are also a fantastic way to record your experience. So they can remove bias because they can be referenced for employment advances and opportunities. You'll actually list the rivers that you've done, the miles that you've done, class of rapid, what the flows are. And so it's something you can continually go back to and say, hey, this is my experience, this is what I've done. So in addition to that, building more training time into your guide scheduling, opening more opportunities to shadow senior guides, and breaking it down, focusing on drills, exercises, and repetition. So if your guide school is only 5 or 7 or 10 days, can you add more skill clinics onto that? Can you focus on surfing and rapping and things like that? And adding those extra skills, which will bring that level of basic knowledge and elevating that for your guides. Do you have the option to, again, shadow senior guides if they're not ready to run that section on their own or in a guide boat? Do they have the option to even see it? What does that look like? And with the drills, you can make it games. You can have flip drills. IRF has a really fun flip drill challenge. Just testing your skill, and you can make it fun as well. There was a guy I know who had a company, and they would do throwback drills at the end of every day. So if you worked for him, before you left, you had to take your throwback out, and most of the time, you didn't use it on that trip. So before you left, he had 2 targets on the wall, like up really high. And so you had a certain point to stand from, and you had to make sure to hit the bullseye before you left on all 3 of those. I worked at another company where we would have our guests swim a class 2 rapid, which was super fun. And at the end of the guests, when they go up to lunch, if you hadn't deployed your throwback, we would have some guides who were helping them jump off the rock swim down. And so you had to, lob them in the head. And if you didn't get them, you swim again. And so we did that training every day to make sure that we're just keeping those skills sharp. And it gets really competitive, it gets really fun. Solution number 2, we're going to be talking about promoting gender integration. So again, this is a photo of our Rafting Magazine junior team. We have multiple female and male coaches. So we got the kiddos around the edge, and then there's myself and Nathan. And we're just breaking down the rapid and having multiple perspectives, because each of those girls are going to learn a different way. And so if we give them more opportunities and more ways of seeing the rapid, they're going to be able to latch onto that and learn those faster as well. So have your male and female trainers teaching side by side. Now what's also fun about that is that men and women have different communication styles. You want a hype man? Men are your biggest cheerleaders. I think Cheyenne mentioned that as well, is guys are always like, yeah, you got this, you can do this, I know you have this. When we, especially as me, I tend to be, really hesitant. And so to have somebody hype me up, like, yeah, I can do that. Whereas women can be more very specific coaches. Okay, so I can do this. I'm excited to do this, but I don't really know how to do it. How do I break this up? And having women's only clinics for skills will definitely help that, because then you can also visit those different ways of, hey, how do I move my elbows? How do I get into the raft? Okay, so you're gonna pull it towards you. You're gonna then rotate your elbows in and then up, and then that's gonna help you get in the raft. And you're gonna push the boat, underneath you rather than towards you. And so just breaking up those different aspects of how to do those skills, so how to get into the boat. You can always hire a consultant if your staff isn't there yet. So if you're like, hey, that sounds great, but I really don't have any female staff there at that level yet. You can always hire somebody from another company to come in and chat. There's not really trade secrets. There's ways to get down the river. So dispersing men and women as evenly as possible throughout the team is also going to be really important. And that's going to be in different ways. So that's going to be in your management team. Do you have any female managers? Do you have any trip leaders? Any head guides? What does that look like for your staff? How does that communication look like? Also, do you have men and women on each section of river? Or do you just have women on the class 3 section and then guys on the class 4 and 5 sections? Again, it's not going to be overnight to get people to that, to get people to those levels, but as much as possible, if we're training and really building and investing into those people, how can we disperse men and women as evenly and get people to that same skill? So the power of 2 parents. So there's a statistic, that's always so hard to say, statistic, that people who come from backgrounds with both parents in the household that are engaged have significantly higher rates of success, better grades in school, better jobs as they get older, better income, because they essentially have both a male and a female mentor available. So having essentially 2 parents really decentralizes the power and creates checks and balances in your staff. It reduces ego and negative competitive behavior. And having an opposite gender in management, especially from your head guide and your head trip leaders, can create built-in accountability. If you see something happening, like predatory behavior or favoritism, even if you do have maybe a female head guide and you're seeing favoritism, and then the guys aren't actually getting on certain sections, or maybe not being a trip leader, then you have that built-in accountability of like not having any or addressing any favoritism or issues. And then we're going to have Cheyenne talk a little bit more about that as well.
And not to overgeneralize, but men are strong enough to sometimes just say, oh, you just gotta go for it, you know? You just gotta pull really hard, push really hard, you know, just get your hips up and you'll make it. So the kind of advice you're gonna get, not from all guys, but from most guys, is gonna be just force your way through it and then you'll kind of get the hang of it, right? And then I'll ask a girl the same question and she'll look at what I'm trying to do and be like, okay, you wanna make sure you get your elbows past this degree, you wanna make sure your hips get higher than, you know, the certain, and they'll be really nitpicky on choosing how you're gonna get through the problem. I would say that's more of an emotional intelligence aspect of women, because you have to think through the entire problem, knowing that you might not have the strength to get through it, but that you absolutely still can get through it. You just need to look at the right technique and the right way for you to get your body through it. So that's the advantage of having a girl tell you how to do something versus a guy tell you how to do something.
And I've talked to a bunch of women from all over the outdoor industry, and we love having both male and female mentors. So again, guys are the best hype men. I love it. So why have a female trainer? Again, we spend more time breaking down certain moves, analyzing those options. If you're going down the river, you know, what options do you have? Do you have to do the line, or can you see another route around that? Talking about, like, do you need to have that forward momentum, or can you point at your object and paddle off of it? Which will reduce a lot of strain on your muscle. And recognizing when to use that emotional intelligence. So, do they really need to paddle hard to the left, or again, can you just back off of those obstacles? So solution number 3, prioritizing that emotional intelligence. So how do we do that? We want to identify where a person is at emotionally and figure out what kind of support they need to meet the goal. It's reinforcing hard skills that they possess. You can do this. We've practiced this over and over. I know you know how to flip the boat. Coaching people from a standpoint of perspective and options. And providing an enhanced safety net, such as having other guides setting safety and or watching somebody do it first. I like to do both, you know. So with the perspective and options, what is the water actually doing? And focusing on what the hydraulics are doing on that certain rapid. And what are our move options? Which ones do you think you can pull off? Let's talk about the 5 elements to build confidence. So the 5 things to help build confidence. And the more that you have of these, the more confidence you're going to inspire your staff. So having mentorship, men and women trainers, representation of women mentors, managers, peers, just having women present is going to be very different. Like Cheyenne mentioned, you know, if I see a guy doing something, that's cool, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I feel like it's attainable to me. But if I see one of my peers doing it, oh yeah, okay, I know I got this. So working on skills, working on scouting, and learning how to read water. Focusing on your drills, exercises, and options. Again, that emotional intelligence. And then goals, having those clear standards for advancement opportunities. So again, more that you have of these in play, the more confidence you're going to inspire in your staff. That's what. Thank you guys so much.